Marianne.
How are you doing?
Who is iPhone 101?
I don't know.
Person with the iPhone, can you identify who you are? Morning, Geraldine.
Good morning. Okay.
Another lovely day. Unfortunately, without a cloud in the sky.
Right.
But Thursday rain is coming, they say. Lots of rain.
I hope. I mean,
Recording in progress.
So when we say Modit Hageshen in the Amida, we really have to
be intentional about it.
you have to mean it. Yes.
Although that's supposedly for Israel, not for us.
Right, yeah. Well,
I don't know how you change that.
yeah, right. That is true.
Oh,
Hi, good morning.
good morning.
Morning, Hank.
God should know where it's needed.
And do you have a few minutes after class?
Actually, I don't, because I promised Harry I was going to run over there right after class.
Okay.
But I'll get you later. I'm only going to stay there a few hours, but I'll get you later.
Okay.
Okay. There's a time that I have to get in between while they're awake and when they go back for a nap. So.
Baby standard time.
Baby standard time, right.
Daily adventure.
Morning, Susan Gordon.
So you were iPhone 101?
Who knows? Somebody's.
That was, oh,
no,
this one is.
Yeah, we don't know who that person is.
That is.
iPhone 101, if you could hear me, if you could identify yourself. Oh, that's Debbie Arbit. Oh, no. Hi, Debbie. Okay. No, you're not.
Isn't Debbie.
Phone 101 is still there. I don't know who that is.
Traveling by car, and nearly 6 million are expected to fly. AAA says the worst times to drive are Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon if you want to be.
Hi, Ellie. Leslie. Hmm.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay.
From Ellie to everyone.
Yeah. Oh, she can't turn on the camera, unmute. Okay.
Oh.
So maybe she did what you did with your screen. You touched the thing on top, right?
Yeah, but you can't unmute either.
Yeah. Oh, Amanda just texted me. Good morning. I've got a sick kid. I'm running a little bit late, but I should be in on your Zoom in less than 10 minutes. Well, we're good. I think we're good. Okay. Okay.
Let me see if I can claim host so I can help you with muting and stuff.
Okay, that would be good.
That would be
Okay.
very good.
I have the correct number.
Morning, Bob.
Morning.
Len, there's a chat from Ellie Cohn. He
Yeah, I saw that.
can't
Yeah.
turn on their camera or unmute.
Right.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Susan is now the host. Okay, good.
I'm now the host, and I can make you co-host, Len. Which
Okay.
you want, Len Hausman or Ann Spector? Be
Len,
co-host.
Make Len.
Len.
Yeah, do
Okay.
that. Hi, Susan.
Morning.
Okay, we are at 9:30 and this train leaves on time. And
Okay.
so we finally, we had such great discussion with the first and second sessions that we're actually going to begin our deep dive into the origins and evolution of Yisker today. Depending on how it goes, we actually may have a fifth session to get to the music of Yisker, because the deep dive is just that. It may take us a couple of sessions to get through. So let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. And blow it up. Can you all see that? Shake your heads if you can see that. Good, excellent, very good. Okay, so there are several strands in the development of the Yisker. One has to do with the notion of atonement. Another has to do with intercession, and there are also some historical strands as well. So there are multiple sources that led to the Yisker. And actually, very interestingly, the Yisker, as we've come to know it today, has less to do with the traditional Orthodox, well, there was no Orthodox back in the day, movement, but rather from, of all places, the very early Reform movement. But stick with us, and you'll get to see some of these interesting sources for the Yisker. So, okay, Linda Glassifer, can you start us off?
Yes.
Thank you.
Liberal Jews who rarely attend a synagogue service, even if they belong to one, will likely attend Kol Nidre on Yom Kippur Eve and the Yisker service on Yom Kippur morning. Some synagogues even list the time of the Yisker service, as they recognize that there are those who will stay for just a part of the service, but want to be sure not to miss Yisker. While we see these two parts of the service as supremely important, the rabbis of old debated whether it was appropriate to include the Kol Nidre prayer at all. And as for the Yisker service, it did not even begin to be a part of the Yom Kippur liturgy until the Middle Ages.
That may surprise many of you, right? That we've always thought that, what's Yom Kippur without Yisker? But it's actually a relatively recent innovation in our tradition. Could you go on, Linda?
The Yisker, as we know it today, is maybe 500 years old, though many assume it is an ancient prayer. Synagogues, including Congregation B'nai Israel in pre-pandemic years, would also post an invitation to non-member residents of the area to attend a separate community Yisker. So centrally is the Yisker prayer on Yom Kippur regarded, even by the unaffiliated twice-a-year Jews.
So my CBI folks, you remember that? We used to have a community Yisker.
Yes.
I see you shaking
Yes.
your heads. Yes, good. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. We don't do it anymore, I don't think, but there are other options for Yisker. Now that we have Zoom or whatever, but that's not the same. Can you Zoom Yisker? I don't know.
Not on Yom Kippur.
Well, Yom Kippur, who knows?
Zoom Yisker is not as meaningful.
It just
to me.
doesn't do it. Okay, go on. Linda.
No. If nothing else, the memory and memorialization of loved ones draws people to a house of worship. Clergy at liberal synagogues typically read the names of members and relatives of members who have yurtzites in the coming week at Friday evening services. A local rabbi once groused to me that the only time he sees many of his shul members attending a Shabbat service is when the names of their deceased loved ones are read. The reading of names is followed by a mourner's Kaddish, often as heartfelt a prayer of connection to a loved one as there is.
Thank you, Linda. Right. So we do that in CBI and probably other shuls. Many other shuls I've been to do the same thing. They read names of the deceased who have yahrzeit in the coming week on Friday night services. Okay. Geraldine, can you read for us?
Surely. The Yisker service ends with the mourner's Kaddish as well,
and when recited communally on Yom Kippur with hundreds of other congregants, it is a coda with a wallop. While Yizkor is also said on the last day of the 3 festival holidays of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and there is in liberal synagogues a small bump in attendance at those services, it is the Yom Kippur Yizkor that fills the house. Its centrality is further bolstered, as usually just before its recitation, the rabbi gives the Yom Kippur morning sermon, often with a theme relating to memory of the preciousness of life.
Can you continue, Joe?
The recently published Machzor Lev Shalom, in its introduction to Yizkor, speaks of its relation to Yom Kippur in contemporary terms. Though Yizkor is recited on each of the festivals, on the high holy days we may feel a special connection to those who have played a significant role on our life's journey. The themes and somber ambiance of the Yom Kippur service make this day especially appropriate for contemplating life and death. Thus, in reciting Yizkor, the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead become more transparent. The last sentence may sound new agey, but it actually reflects a traditional understanding implicit in the Yizkor, as we shall see.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Joe. Any comments so far, or any, especially about this last sentence, that the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead become more transparent on Yom Kippur Yizkor?
I just have a question.
Yes.
Was the Yizkor service included on the Shalosh Regalim at the same time it was included for Yom Kippur?
We'll get to that, but the short answer is no. Debbie Arvit?
I just have a mini comment, not about the last sentence, but in our synagogue. We announced the names at the week after the Yizkor, not the week before, not the Shabbat
Yes, right.
before the
That's what
Yizkor.
you mean, yes. Yes.
And I think some synagogues do it different ways.
Okay.
I always feel that the combination of, the solemnity and fasting on Yom Kippur makes you feel very vulnerable and very weak. And I think you really feel it inside, and I think maybe that's where you get to that worlds of the living and dead become more transparent.
Yes, yes.
I agree with you,
Yeah,
Harry.
that on that point, yeah, Harry. I mean, we'll get to this too. That on Yom Kippur, it's almost a rehearsal for our own deaths, and thus we're closer to those who have died. We wear white, we fast, we abstain from marital relations, right? All these things. Yes, yes, indeed. Thank you, Harriet.
Sure.
Okay. Hank, can you read for us? Are you able to read for us? Thank you.
Mute.
I'm unmuted. Okay. What is it about Yizkor on Yom Kippur that makes it such a powerful draw? We may think this is so for all Jews. It may surprise you to know that Sephardic and Mizrahi synagogues have no Yizkor service on Yom Kippur morning, nor on festival mornings, as we Ashkenazi Jews have come to know it. And even in the Ashkenazi world, there are variations on what constitutes a Yizkor service, especially among the denominations.
Yeah, that was a surprise to me, and we'll get to the reasons why that is, that Mizrahi Jews, Sephardic Jews, Mizrahi Jews do not have a Yizkor service as we Ashkenazi Jews know it. So there are clear reasons for that, and we will get to that. Okay, can you continue, Hank?
There is no more important day as Yom Kippur in our calendar, with an entire tractate of Talmud, Masechet Yoma, devoted to its observance. And arguably, there is no more important and heartfelt moment in the Yom Kippur liturgy than the Yizkor that is recited on that morning. How did this most awesome day of the year come to include the Yizkor, and which was, from a historical perspective, an innovation? The Talmud tractate does not know of it.
Go on.
To look at the origins of Yizkor, we need to look at its prehistory, as there were beliefs in antiquity that laid a groundwork for its eventual development. The oldest text we have that suggests a background for Yizkor is found in the non-canonical second book of Maccabees. That text was written in Greek, most likely in Alexandria, a major Jewish population center, somewhere between 150 and 120 BCE.
Okay, so now we start to get into the origins of afterlife beliefs in our tradition. Okay, Susan Gordon, can you read for us this from Second Maccabees?
Judas rallied his army and went to the city of Adullam. As the seventh day was approaching, they purified themselves according to custom and kept the Sabbath there. On the following day, since the task had now become urgent, Judas and his companions went to gather up the bodies of the fallen and bury them with their kindred in their ancestral tombs. But under the tunic of each of the dead, they found amulets sacred to the idols of Jamnia, which the law forbids the Jews to wear. So it was clear to all that this was why these men had fallen. They all therefore praised the ways of the Lord, the just judge who brings to light the things that are hidden.
So there we have Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, and the just judge, right? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, Ellie Cohen.
What exactly is an amulet?
It's something, a pendant that you wear around your neck that has, it's a pendant.
But does it have anything in it? Is it what makes it not just a necklace?
It can have words, or it can have an image. It can have an image, typically. Yeah. It was usually something religious. I think is the connotation here. Like something, a prayer to a god, local god, or whatever. Something that like that. So now we know if you want to be protected, be careful of what amulet you wear. Mezuzah is okay. Mezuzah would be an amulet that you wear around your neck, right? Or a chai might be considered that. Maybe not. Go on, Susan.
Turning to supplication, they prayed that the sinful deed might be fully blotted out. The noble Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves free from sin, for they had seen with their own eyes what had happened because of the sin of those who had fallen. He then took up a collection among all his soldiers amounting to 2,000 silver drachmas, which he sent to Jerusalem to provide for an expiatory sacrifice. In doing this, he acted in a very excellent and noble way, inasmuch as he had the resurrection in mind. For if he were not expecting the fallen to rise again, it would have been superfluous and foolish to pray for the dead. But if he did this with a view to the splendid reward that awaits those who had gone to rest in godliness, it was a holy and pious thought. Thus he made atonement for the dead that they might be absolved for their sin, which is, I see where that's going.
So yeah, so what do you think about this Second Maccabees, 2nd century before the Common Era text?
I've never heard elsewhere of being able to atone for other people's sins. Like the first step of atonement is to ask forgiveness of either from God if you sinned against God or the person you sinned against. I mean, it's more of a Christian thing, the concept that you can, right?
Well, we do that all the time when we recite
Yizkor. Way ahead of where I am right now, but
you asked what we thought.
Right. So yes, in our tradition now, on Yom Kippur, we ask it, we pray for atonement from God, and then we have to ask those in our lives for atonement for those sins. But here we have a connection between atonement and death, right? So Christians take that big time. Of course, Jesus atones for everybody's sins, but this is not that. But we have here a connection between the idea of atonement and the idea of death, and we also have a connection between death, atonement, and the afterlife. What's going to happen. In the splendid reward that awaits. Right. So so we have the roots of those beliefs here. Can you go on?
What we have here is an example of tzedakah that the living are to give for the purpose of making atonement for the souls of the dead. so that their guilt could be expiated and thereby merit Gan Eden in the end times when they would be resurrected. This text reflects belief in an afterlife and practices to facilitate a good entry into it that must have been prevalent in the late 2nd and 1st centuries BCE.
So the critical ingredient here is those 2,000 drachmas that the soldiers had to collect and send to Jerusalem to make the atonement sacrifice, and pay for it. So we have also a connection between clearing the souls of the dead, right, and atoning for their sin, and you have to do that by collecting money. Without money, no deal. Thank you, Susan. Bob Brower, are you able to read for us?
Sure. Excuse me. There is an often quoted and embellished story about Rabbi Akiva, late 1st to early 2nd century CE, found in a 6th century CE compilation called Masechet Kala Rabbatai, one of a number of minor post-Talmudic tractates. The story highlights the idea that the living can bring about atonement for the dead. Rabbi Akiva comes upon a tortured spirit in a cemetery being punished in the next world due to his many terrible sins, including harshly impoverishing the poorest while favoring the rich in his work as a tax collector, and impregnating a betrothed maiden on Yom Kippur of all days. Rabbi Akiva finds the unborn mamzer, the bastard child of the maiden, circumcises him after his birth, raises him and educates him to come to synagogue to properly lead the public davening and the Baruch Hu. We assume all this with the mother's assent. These actions finally give rest to the tortured soul of the father.
Okay, so what do we have here? We have that that this son of this guy who's the tortured soul, right, can make atonement for his father by being brought up in the tradition and being able to at least say Baruch Hu in the shul and lead services, at least a little bit. Can you continue, Bob?
We will be looking further at the notion that the souls of the dead need atonement. But first, we turn our attention to the impetus for the development of memorial prayers. Many scholars believe that the first memorial prayers for the deceased date to the late 11th century, spurred by the indiscriminate killing of thousands of Jews in the Rhineland by Christians on their way to free the Holy Land from Muslim subjugation during the First Crusade. It was further spurred after thousands of Jews throughout Europe were slaughtered in 1348, when Jews were held responsible for the Black Death. Names of the martyred Jews would be read in synagogues, and the lists of names were kept in memory books called Memorbucher in German. Later on, the names of other deceased community members were added.
Okay, so this is not Yizkor yet, but we have the idea of memorial prayers being part of the synagogue service. At some point, in the 11th or 12th century, it started that custom. Go on.
Sadly, in that same tradition, some 1,600 Yizkor Becher have been published commemorating the towns and their inhabitants that were wiped out during the Shoah. The listing of names of the deceased in a pamphlet that many synagogues print prior to Yom Kippur is not simply a modern fundraising device. The practice may well be rooted in the Memorbucher of late 11th century Rhineland.
Thank you, Bob. Leslie, thank you.
Sure. The intent of the original memorial prayer was that by dint of this prayer, the deceased would intervene before God and reduce the suffering of the Jews. The roots of this idea can be seen hundreds of years earlier in the Talmud. The Gemara further asks, and why do they go out to the cemetery on a fast day? Again, Rabbi Levi Bar Hama and Rabbi Hanina disagree with regard to this matter. One said, this is as though to say, we are like the dead before you. And one said that one goes out to the cemetery in order that the deceased will request mercy on our behalf. The Gemara asks, What is the practical difference between them? The Gemara answers that the practical difference between them concerns graves of Gentiles. If the purpose of going to graves is to say that they stand before God like the dead, graves of Gentiles would suffice. However, if they go to the cemetery for the deceased to ask for mercy on their behalf, they should visit specifically Jewish graves.
Okay. So here we have another strand that in going to the cemetery, here not so much to ask for atonement for the deceased, but to intercede on our behalf. So this is the second strand here that's leading to memorial prayers and to visiting the grave. Go on.
We see a similar Talmud example in Sota 34b. Okay, I'm not going to read that.
No, it's okay.
We'll be here all day, but that's okay. It also stated with regard to the spies, and they went up into the south, and he came to Hebron. Why is this phrase, and he came, written in the singular form? The verse should have said, and they came. Rabbah says, this teaches that Caleb separated himself from the council of the other spies and went and prostrated himself on the graves of his forefathers in Hebron. He said to them, my forefathers, pray for mercy for me, so that I will be saved from the council of the spies.
Okay, so here we have again the effectiveness or hope for effectiveness of going to where your forefathers are, your ancestors are, and praying on their graves, and so that that you will have intercession from a bad outcome.
Len, does this have to do with why we are told to go to the cemetery but in the weekend or whatever the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, so that we intercede for them before the gates close?
We intercede for them and ourselves, and that's exactly where I'm going. You're right.
Sorry.
You're right. No, you're right there. You are right there. Howard, can you take us further? Thank you, Leslie.
Both in the Talmud sections above and in the impulse of the original Yiska, the prayers were not so much about our remembering the deceased or praying for the elevation and peace of their souls or making atonement for them. It was about God's taking note, remembering of the dead, so that the power of the dead could be called upon in asking for God's intervention on behalf of the living. We are memorializing the dead not simply to remember them, but more so for the purpose that by their merit, God will intercede for us. We also see the first Talmud section, a source for the special efficiency of visiting the dead around fast days, when our prayers to this end would be more fervent and penitential.
Can you go on, Howard?
We see as well the reasons for the custom of visiting the graves of one's parents and family members in the period leading up to the high holidays and between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There was already an established fast day during this period, the fast of Gedaliah. Gedaliah was a Babylonian appointed Jewish governor during the 5th century BCE in Judea for those Jews remaining after most had been exiled. His leadership was regarded as wise and pious. He was assassinated by fellow Jews who were against his tactical alliance with the Babylonians. The Jewish presence in Judea was totally ended following his death. The fast is held on the 3rd day of Tishrei, right after Rosh Hashanah.
Right, very interesting. Thank you, Howard. Susan Cohen?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Building on the custom of visiting graves of the deceased on fast days cited in the passage from the Talmud, is a midrashic tradition that our fate for the coming year is being weighed and judged during this 10-day penitential period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We want the heavenly tribunal, as it were, to give us a favorable verdict for a new year, one of health, fulfillment, and prosperity. Accordingly, in the traditional view, at the cemetery, we are asking our departed to weigh in and testify for us during this most fraught and fateful time of the year. While we, of course, do not visit a cemetery on Yom Kippur, it is a fast day and one that even well before the 11th century carried an association between fasting and the dead.
Go on.
The persistence of the association between visiting graves, Yom Kippur, and asking for the intervention of ancestors on our behalf at this propitious time of the year can be seen in a mid-18th century Yiddish prayer, Techina of the Three Gates, Shloisha Sha'orim, written by Sarah Bastovin. Prayer was written for women to say when they visited ancestors' graves prior to Yom Kippur. During the visit, they would measure string for wicks and make yahrzeit candles for Yom Kippur. The text turns to biblical patriarchs and matriarchs, asking that by their merit, may there be forgiveness and repair in the year ahead for the living. Studying this prayer offers a window into the religious universe inhabited by early modern Eastern European Jewish women as they prepared for the holiest day of the year.
Okay, thank you, Susan Cohen. Okay. Henry, can you read for us?
Rabbi Alfred Kolach, in his popular Jewish Book of Why, notes that there was opposition to the introduction of Yizkor into the synagogue service, at least among the rabbis. The rabbi he quotes was the last head or Gaon of the major Talmudic academy in Umbedida, Babylonia. He was a major decisor of Jewish law and gave responsa to Jews in the diaspora, including German lands, and the quote may be accurate. It should be noted, however, that the rabbi died 70 years before the First Crusade, and the term Yizkor was not likely to be in use until years or centuries later. Rabbi Kolach writes, Gaon, the most eminent Babylonian scholar of the 11th century, together with his prominent pupil Nisim ben Yaakov, opposed the custom of praying for the dead on festivals and on Yom Kippur. They also opposed donating charity in memory of the dead, as the Yizkor prayer requires. These scholars believe that the only things important to God are the good deeds an individual himself actually performs in his own lifetime. He cannot be saved through the good deeds of his parents. The attitudes of Gaon and his disciple did not find favor with the masses, who wanted to maintain strong links to their deceased parents. The observance of Yizkor, therefore, continued and spread.
So we can see here that there was more of a kind of a need from the people. This was from the ground up to have a memorial prayer, even though the rabbis were kind of against it. It's kind of in parallel with Kol Nidre. There are rabbis who, were divided or even against Kol Nidre, but the masses had to have it, so there it is. You go on, Henry.
From its earliest forms, the memorial service, recited just on Yom Kippur, included a pledge for charity. It was a belief that not only the living, but also the deceased can receive atonement for their sins, a belief with roots at least back to when Second Maccabees was written, as we discussed. The atonement was brought about through pledging tzedakah. The rabbinic name for Yom Kippur is actually Yom HaKippurim, the plural atonements, pointing to the atonement available to both the living and the dead.
Never thought of it that way before, but there you have that. Okay. Thank you, Henry. Merle, can you read for us?
Yes. Midrash Sifre states that the dead also require atonement. Midrash Tanhuma states that the living have a responsibility to redeem the dead, and that on Yom Kippur we remember the dead and offer charity on their behalf in order to save them from Gehenna and cleanse them from their sins. These midrashim attest to a strong connection during the first millennium between Yom Kippur, atonement, which includes fasting, charity, and the dead. It also appears that there was already a practice to mark Yom Kippur with memorial prayers of some sort prior to the Crusades.
Come on.
Rabbi Simcha Paul Raphael, who writes about Jewish views of the afterlife, states, for our ancestors, a mutual benefit system between the living and the dead was in place. There were no existential or philosophical questions about whether there was life after death. It was simple. The living prayed for the souls of the dead, and the dead were available to serve as benevolent intercessors for the living. This philosophical and spiritual point of view underlies the tradition of saying Yizkor on Yom Kippur.
So what do you think of that statement?
Well, that's what I'm sort of getting from this lesson. That's not just a one-way remembering and honoring your ancestors or your beloved dead more recently. It includes this penitential part where we're asking them to help us. So it's interesting.
Other comments about this?
I had always thought that if you got into heaven, you were already judged worthy, that you had a clean slate. And so I'm like, for the first time, seeing that they still need redemption to be absolved of their sins. I mean, and there's a chance of them going to Gehenna still. I mean, if we don't do that.
well, we have the concept of raising the soul, higher, having an aliyah for the deceased, right? That at each go around, that the soul gets pushed further and further to Gan Eden, and that there are different levels of afterlife. You can be in Motel 6 while you wait for redemption. You can be in the Hilton. You can be you could be at the Fountain View in Miami. I mean, so in different places. So the soul still needs can be worked and further atonement made, and the soul being sculpted to get into a part star place.
What really surprises me about everything we've read today is how much talk there is about the dead being involved, both as intercessors for the living, basically, being at the cemetery, being how involved there are. That's not something I've normally read about in Jewish readings, that we really think they're still, hanging out, except, we talked about it last week, that they come in through the mirrors at the Shiva and stuff like that. But, right? This is not what we're commonly hearing about.
I find it heartwarming. That the dead are still with us in a sense. They're still a part of our lives. There's still things we can do for them and they can do for us. They are not gone and forgotten. Ali, you wanted to comment.
I just was thinking, this reminds me of the TV show The Good Place. I don't know if people have seen it, but where the dead are still doing all these things. I haven't seen it. I mean, it hasn't been on for a while, but it just reminds me of The Good Place.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Harriet, can you read us?
Eliezer of Worms, a leading Talmudist, explains that charity was pledged on behalf of the dead on Yom Kippur in order to effect their atonement, whereas on the other festivals, there was a general appeal not connected with atonement for the deceased. Joseph Caro, in his Compendium of Halacha, Shulchan Aruch, written in 1565, mentions the giving of charity on behalf of the dead on Yom Kippur. A contemporary, Moses Isserlis, adds in his glosses on the Shulchan Aruch that it was customary to recall the deceased at that time with the saying of Yizkor and its offer of charity. There is no mention of Yizkor then at a time other than Yom Kippur in Rabbi Isserlis' writing.
Right. So as to the question of Yizkor, only being on Yom Kippur, or this is only in the 1500s. Even in the 1500s, it's only being talked about as being done on Yom Kippur, not the other festivals. Interestingly. And we find in the Shulchan Aruch, in the 1500s, mentioning giving charity on Yom Kippur on behalf of the dead. Go on, Harriet.
Fulfilling the pledge of charity was critical to bring about the atonement of the deceased. When the Yizkor prayer developed, the giving of charity was an essential element. Not fulfilling the pledge was to invite negative repercussions for the soul of the dead relative. To get around this potential problem, as forgetting can easily occur, in later periods, some machzorim would add the words bli neder, without a formal promise, sometimes in parentheses, right after the declaration of a monetary pledge. Rabbi Maurice Lamb, in his The Jewish Way in Death and Mourning, adds that the declaration should not be taken lightly. If no charity will be given, the phrase should not be included. It is preferable not to promise than to renege on a promise.
It's right up your alley, because it's kind of legalese. If we put in the parentheses, or maybe leave it out, whatever. We don't want the soul to get in trouble because we made a monetary pledge that we don't honor. Can you continue, Howard?
Of course. It was not a far distance for the biblical Day of Atonement for the living to become a Day of Atonement for the dead as well. The central liturgy of Yom Kippur provided fertile ground for the eventual development of a memorial prayer with its implicit request for the atonement of the deceased. The Torah reading for Yom Kippur is Acharei Mot, meaning after the death of Aaron's two sons. The reading begins with those words as it ties that episode, even though it occurs 6 chapters prior, to what occurs next. The atonement ritual of the high priest to be enacted on Yom Kippur in the holy place.
Okay, thank you, Harriet.
Sure, thanks.
Ali, can you read for us?
I just want to say, every now and then I can't read, the words get funny, but I'll try. The atonement ritual was for the high priest himself, his family, and the community. Aaron's two sons, who were otherwise as righteous, committed an unknown trespass that was serious enough to warrant their death. Even though the Torah does not speak of souls, in post-biblical times, the idea of a soul surviving death was widely accepted. The souls of Aaron's two sons surely needed atonement along with the rest of Aaron's family and everyone else. In the Torah passage, the memory of Aaron's deceased sons is directly linked to the meaning of Yom Kippur with its atonement rituals. The earliest reference in a prayer book that clearly documents the association between fasting, atonement for both the living and the dead, and Yom Kippur is found in Machzor Vitry. It was compiled by Simcha ben Shmuel of Vitry, who died in 1105 and who was a French Talmudist and student of Rashi. The work contains decisions and rules of religious practice, along with prayers and liturgical poems. It is not a machzor as we know it, a prayer book just for the high holidays or festivals, but meant to be used year-round. There are about a dozen surviving copies, and JTS has one of them. the following is the section pertaining to Yom Kippur and the dead.
Okay, so I'm just going to show you this and then go to the English. So you can see here, after the Torah reading, right, there's what's said in the final blessing for the Haftorah, Al HaTorah, Al Avodah, Al Nevi'im, yeah, Yom HaKippurim Pasach, right? We say all of that after the Yom Kippur Haftorah reading. And then it talks about giving charity for the living and the dead, Chayim Be'al Meitim, okay, and it's done in the lands of Ashkenaz, okay, and it talks about this being done for the souls that they may go from Gehenna to the Garden of to Gan Eden, like an arrow shot from a bow, and that okay, and that there is no fasting, ein ta'anit, without charity, without tzedakah. And here's the English of that. Debbie, can you take us through this? Thank you, Ellie.
The first 6 lines contain the traditional blessing said after chanting of the Haftorah, along with a special last line mentioning Yom HaKippurim. The text states that at this point in the Yom Kippur service, where our Yizkor is said today, there is a public declaration of tzedakah, and it is made on behalf of the living and the dead. It goes on to state that only on this day, in all the lands of Ashkenaz, is tzedakah given on behalf of the dead. Furthermore, it clarifies the reason for this practice, to effect atonement for the dead, kapara, slichot, and mechila.
Okay, so here's the clearest source for the coming up.
The shofar.
Oh. So here we have the clearest source for the development of Yiska, and you know, in the 12th century here. So we don't have Yiska set, but we have these traditions and customs of tzedakah being said, you know, right at the point where we now have the Yiska service, tzedakah being said for in memory of the dead, as well as ourselves. Can you go on, Debbie?
The giver of charity creates a tachana, a rectification for the deceased by dint of that act. By this, the deceased is thrown out of Gehenna and goes directly to Gan Eden, like an arrow shot from a bow. The text then references Sifrei, 3rd to 5th century Midrash, stating that the dead require atonement. It then adds that there is no fast day that is valid without the giving of tzedakah, comparing it to an incomplete sacrifice in temple times. From this 11th century text, we have the foundations of what would become the Yizkor service, where Yom Kippur, fasting, and tzedakah, and atonement for ourselves and the dead are all combined. The use of the metaphor, like an arrow shot from a bow, is analogizing the efficaciousness of tzedakah for the deceased in bringing about atonement and quick entry to paradisical bliss. Echoes an earlier, paradisic, did I pronounce it right?
Yeah.
Echoes an earlier text from Midrash Tanhuma, a work explicating each portion of the Torah, which dates from 500 to 800 CE.
Okay, we'll skip that. Okay, go on.
This excerpt from Midrash Tanhuma is a commentary on Deuteronomy, chapter 27, verse 7 to 8, where an unidentified body is found murdered, and a procedure known as egla arufa, breaking of a heifer's neck, is described. The local leaders declare that the extent to which they bear some degree of responsibility, and there is a request to God for kapara, atonement for the spilt blood, for the living and for the dead.
So here this goes back even to biblical times as a root. Thank you, Debbie. Henry, can you take us further?
The Midrash Tanhuma expands on this in the excerpt above and notes the custom on Yom Kippur of mentioning the departed giving tzedakah in their merit. Where the text in Deuteronomy 21:8 states, "Forgive thy people whom thou hast redeemed," the first part of the phrase, "Kaper le'amcha Yisrael," forgive thy people Israel, this refers to atonement for the living. Second part of the phrase, Asher Adita, whom thou hast redeemed, this refers to atonement for the dead. Midrash Tanhuma cites this as proof from the Torah itself that on Yom Kippur the living can redeem the dead, and that this is brought about by pledging charity on their behalf.
So if you have any doubts about whether you should pledge charity, according to this, it's in the Bible. It's in the Torah. You better do it. Go on.
By the 14th century, there are references to giving charity in memory of the deceased on the last day of the 3 pilgrimage festivals, likely as part of a memorial service as well as on Yom Kippur. The names of the deceased were recited at those times, but the key element was memorial donation. Jacob Molin, 1365 to 1427, known as the Maharil, notes that on every last festival day, where the Torah verse, each according to his gift, Ish Kamatnat Yado, Deuteronomy 16:17, is read as part of the Kol HaBechor reading, that we mention the souls of the departed and recite the prayer of Harachamim.
Okay. So again, this is not Yizkor, but we have a memorial prayer going on called Av Harachamim. Go on.
Originally, there were no memorial prayers on those last days of the festivals, only a pledge of charity. The verse's reference to giving gifts to the temple on festivals, called Matnat Yad after the Torah verse, became a reason for soliciting synagogue pledges on that same day. As there had already been a custom of pledging charity in the name of a deceased, it was a natural evolution for memorial prayers to expand from Yom Kippur to the festivals. Yet there was ambivalence among some rabbis to do so on festivals, because the joy of the holiday might be diluted by memorial prayers, mourning being incompatible with the spirit of the day. But since it would be said on the last day of the festival, and the shul and community needed the tzedakah, the custom held.
And so remember, there were no shul dues, back in the day. So from Cantor, this topic of the evolution of Yizkor could perhaps be renamed the evolution of Jewish guilt. Indeed. So there were no shul dues, right? There was no building fund. There was no capital campaign. I mean, there were still expenses. I mean, there were always expenses that had to be done for the maintenance of the Jewish community. So how do you do it? So we have to tie in, prayers for the dead and giving money. I had to go together, and that's how you did it. And then they had the auctioning off of aliyot on the holidays, right? You had to give tzedakah if you got an aliyah.
But to Cantor's point, something, this is like really troubling to me. We've had all these discussions about how some people think their children are never going to visit their graves, and they just don't do what we always did. So now we have to be talking to our kids about, after I'm gone, you better pay charity on my behalf. Otherwise, I mean,
I was thinking the same thing, Harriet. Like, I feel like if too many people find out the real reasons for this, Len, I don't think that most people are going to even feel like this is something important to do anymore. I mean, it's very troubling. And honestly, I didn't really look so far into, what, the actual origins, and it is very troubling. And I don't think that it makes it any more compelling for people to want to actually, for these reasons. If these are the reasons to, that you're arguing that we should continue to, to say Yizkor and give tzedakah, I don't think that future generations are going to find this too compelling. So we got to reframe this, Len, in a big way.
No, you have to stay tuned to next week when we talk about the evolution of Yizkor.
Right.
We're talking right now about the origins of Yizkor. That's just
I appreciate it. Yeah, right. I know that you're not arguing for this, but I'm just saying in general, as a community, we need to
stay tuned, because we have to give thanks to the early Reform movement, in the early 19th century, for Yizkor becoming what we wanted to, when it has become today, at least in liberal Judaism. I don't know about Orthodox Judaism, but even a little bit there too. And we will see. But yes, if you knew about these origins, Yizkor may never be the same to you again. I'm sorry to spoil that for you.
But the tzedakah
It got me out.
to it's part of the Jewish ethos that you take care of those who need help. And it's not just synagogue dues or
That's
whatever,
true,
you're
yes.
taking care of
Yes,
people.
yes.
And that is part of
Right,
the ethos.
right. Tzedakah is not just for the shul. We can give it for any legitimate cause. Although I have to say, when for the for the high holiday appeal or whatever that comes around, I have it intentionally that it is to fulfill my pledge that is made on Yizkor. I do connect it, and I always have. So it does work for me, and it makes it's not okay. I have to write a check for the shul, okay, but I connect it to honor the memory of my loved ones. So it can work, and it does work for me personally. So, who'd we have reading?
Can I just say something?
Oh yes, from Gerald.
I remember when I was very young, we went to my grandparents' grave, my mother's parents, were the ones who came from Europe, from Hungary. And my mother invited my grandmother, because my grandfather was still alive, to my brothers and my bat mitzvah and to my brother's bar mitzvah. And that was the reason for going to the grave at that point. And also in my brother's and my grandfather's shul in Jersey City, the Orthodox shul, they bartered for the aliyot on Yom Kippur.
Right. Yes, indeed. Any other comments? Okay, interesting. Okay, very good. Thank you, Lorna, for being here today. So let's go on. Anne, could you read for us?
Sure. The rabbis were adept at coming up with rationales to justify the custom. One suggested that the souls of the dead were even more in need of an aliyah, a raising up on a Chag festival, and that the worshippers needed to draw strength from the emunah, faith, provided by the recitation of the Yizkor. Another reasoned that as the years pass for most people, remembering their loved ones brings about a happy and comforting feeling, and the saying of Yizkor can actually enhance the Simchat HaChag, joy of the festival. Another rationale is that even at the happiest moments, we are keen to remember death to remind us to make the most of every moment. Israeli scholar Zvi Ron writes that the Yizkor paragraph itself is essentially a pledge of charity on behalf of the deceased, comparing it to the traditional Mishaberach, which is also a blessing, accompanying a donation to charity and is not an independent prayer. He notes that the verb liskor has a double meaning, to remember and to recite, and that the original Yizkor prayer is based on the latter meaning. It was basically an elaborate recitation of the beloved deceased along with a donation, with prayers independent of charity developing in later periods.
Furthermore, Zvi Ran finds that in early Ashkenaz, it was customary to make even general pledges of charity also on behalf of the deceased. It became normative to associate any giving of charity with a memory of the dead. Perhaps that is the source of the centuries-old custom of inscribing the name of one's beloved dead on a donated ritual object in the synagogue. In some synagogues, it can even be seen on the parochet, the Torah curtain. I know in our show, various objects have the names of loved ones in whose memory those things were donated. The earliest memorial prayer that became part of the liturgy was most likely not the short individual prayer, the Yizkor itself, but rather the communal prayer for the dead, Av Harachamim, Mother of Compassion, which does date from the period of the Crusades. It first shows up in a Siddur dating from around 1290, and it powerfully expresses grief and outrage over the thousands who were martyred simply for being Jews and asks for God's vengeance It asks God to remember with compassion the pious, upright, and the blameless, holy communities who sacrificed their lives for the sanctification of God's name. The prayer was originally said only during Sfirat HaOmer, the springtime period leading up to Shavuot, when the largest number of Jews were martyred in the Rhineland. And this prayer was said along with the recital of names of the dead in the Memoir Bachar. And I think that this period of Sfirat HaOmer and the customs we have of not getting haircuts or not having weddings, is also to remember that a lot of bad things happened, to Jews during that period, whether it was the period of the Hadrianic persecutions or after the Bar Kokhba revolt, or this period from the Crusades, because it's a fraught period in Jewish memory. Okay. I think I'm going to stop here for today and ask you for any comments or questions about what we've done so far here. Yeah, let me stop my share. Okay. Let's see. Okay, and let me get you here. Okay, I can see all of you. Here we are. Okay. Any comments or questions or thoughts about what we've done today? Okay, Leslie?
Yeah, I have a few comments. I thought it was really interesting. I didn't know probably 99% of what we learned today. But my first comment was I was just at the cemetery yesterday for my father's unveiling, and nobody brought food of the other people that were at the cemetery. So I was looking around actually, just to see what was going on. But I did notice there were a lot of benches that I never noticed before. So maybe people, when they choose to memorialize, their loved ones, they on purpose purchase, very beautiful benches, maybe with the idea of sitting and having a meal. I don't know, but nobody was doing that.
I do recall at my own family circle site in the cemetery that there are benches. There are two benches. I never connected. Well, it was there to sit and have a munch, so it could well be.
Yeah.
But I do recall in my youth at unveilings at the cemetery that there was food actually brought then.
Right.
But in subsequent years, I think they've just stopped at a bagel place down the road.
Yeah. So that was the first thought. The second thought was when I was a kid growing up on Long Island, children never attended the Yizkor service. It was like a given that if you were, maybe, well, definitely below the age of bar bat mitzvah, you had to leave the sanctuary. And I don't know if that's true for everybody who's participating today. So I was associated with Yizkor with like this horrible, like, oh my God, we're going to talk about dead people ideas. So I always grew up very afraid of Yizkor. And, as I got older, I understood a little bit more about it, but I don't really know how we handle it at CBI. I mean, the rabbi never says, oh, we must leave. No, it doesn't happen. But, I don't know how it is now because I never really thought about it. But, I think it's good to have this connection, not like a scary connection, but more positive connection.
Actually, next week, we're going to talk about that very issue in depth. Okay, so stay tuned. Yes. And I was just looking at the Art Scroll, which is an Orthodox book. It still says that people whose parents are living should walk out, but the liberal movements have other ideas. So we're gonna get to that next time. Okay. Okay, Murray, you had a comment?
My comment was that it wasn't fear of death, at least in our case. My father would say, you'll have to say Yizkor at some point in the future. Don't rush it. And that was the reason for leaving. That, thank God, you didn't have to say Kaddish for your parents. They were still alive.
Thank you. Okay, so we are there for today. Thank you all for
I
coming.
think Geraldine has her hand raised.
Say again, Susan?
Geraldine has.
Oh, Geraldine, you had a comment.
I was just going to say in the cemetery out on Long Island where my grandparents are buried, it was a group of that my grandfather belonged to from where they bought the plot, and there were benches there also. We never brought food right to the cemetery, but I wonder if also it was because it was such a long distance from where they lived. They had the benches there for them to sit and talk and also to have something to eat.
Yes, okay. Indeed. Leslie?
Oh, I'm done. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. All right. So,
Could I
Debbie,
just say one thing? If you look it up, most Jewish websites say it is forbidden to eat and drink in a cemetery. You're allowed to bring food in, but not eat it in a Jewish cemetery.
Interestingly,
That's why most people don't bring food to eat it at the cemetery. It's really not, I mean, they say it's prohibited. I mean, nobody's there to check on you, but it's customary not to eat in a cemetery.
Okay, so thank you for that. There are different traditions, clearly.
Yeah, certainly.
We are actually a week behind. I mean, the discussion has been wonderful. So we're actually going to have a fifth session to get to everything. So next week we're going to finish up on Yizkor itself, and then we're going to move the week after that, which is the first Monday in December, to I titled it "The Music, Yes, the Music of Yizkor." So so that at least we're going to have something different that relates to this to um, to discuss then and to listen to then. So have a good week, everybody, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lynn.
Here, everybody.
Yasher koach.
Yasher koach.
Thank you all for being here. Bye bye.
Okay, you need anything, Len? Otherwise, oh, he left. All right, I'm ending for all.